broadcasting from the spooky South Coast and around the world on Midnight FM. This is Midnight Society. I am your host, Tim Weisberg. Whether it is the brightest of day or the darkest of night, wherever you may be, it's time to hunker down for the next 2 hours as we enter into a world of wonder and weird that you won't hear anywhere else. And tonight it'll definitely get weird. Tonight we're going to be talking with our friend JP Hague about more about the exotic side of UAP. He's on the line with us all the way from the island nation of Mauritius. We're going to find out everything that's going on there and around the world with the UAP phenomena. And just first of all, apologies if you are getting a little bit of a background hiss. You might not have even noticed if I didn't point it out, but I had to have the fans running in here tonight because I haven't yet put the screens in the windows of the home studio. And so it's a little warm in here. So I turned the fan on. I'll try and cut it down once I cool the room off, but I don't think it's too bad. I am looking to, if we can raise up some more funds, I'm looking to replace my microphone and get something that might be a little bit better at filtering out some of this background noise. But, I don't think it's going to bother anybody too much. If it does, just let me know. Send me a message, put it on Twitter, and I'll turn the fans off, and I'll just sweat for you. That's what I'll do for all of you out there. So before we get into the discussion tonight, I have to address something here. So please, indulge me a few moments here. The story came out earlier today. The story was published. Actually, it was published yesterday, but it was brought to my attention today, being put in the Midnight Society Facebook group and being sent to me online. And if you haven't seen the story yet, it's in the Midnight Society with Tim Weisberg Facebook group. And you can go there and read it for yourself. When you go there, you're not going to miss it because you'll see the classic photo of Art Bell standing in front of the satellite array wearing his South Park t-shirt. And you'll see it right pretty close to the top of the group. And it was Jerry that first brought this to my attention, but also, Tracy was going back and forth with me on it too, and you can read all the comments there. But here's the gist of the story. And this comes from North Jersey's, the New Jersey Herald, rather. The name of the author is Tom Nobile. He's the writer of this piece. And the title of the article, which I'm going to overlook my disdain for multiple sentences in a headline. There should never be a period in a headline. It's no conspiracy. Legacy of late night radio legend Art Bell is at stake in New Jersey lawsuit. First of all, let this be the last time that we have to hear the word legacy in relation to Art Bell. And I'm going to guess that word was tossed into the conversation by the subject of this piece. And second of all, let me just start at the outset here by telling you that this title is way overplaying what is actually at stake here. So a lot of you remember, a lot of you came from the previous program that I hosted, that being Midnight in the Desert on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I came into that position at the beginning of 2020. I'd been filling in for previous host Dave Schrader when he was out filming the Holzer Files. He had to go out and film season 2. We knew he was going to be gone for a while. It just made sense for him to kind of step away and for me to step in. And Dave could go back to focusing on doing the already full slate of radio he had, in addition to filming a television show. And so I took over as the host, but, Michelle and Keith were there already. But it was that new era in January. And by April, a new owner had come in and purchased the network from Keith. And reading this article here and seeing what was paid for the network, I don't blame Keith for taking the money and retiring, mainly because he was already ready to retire before I even took over as host. To be honest, and I don't think Keith would mind me saying this, we kind of were convincing him to keep going because he was just burnt out. But we were telling him like, hey, just train Michelle and I and we'll take over for you. We'll eventually be the ones to do all the work and you can just sit back and be, the third silent partner that gets to retire and doesn't have to do any work. Because, he had just been burnt out from doing it every single night for years. So these new owners took over, and I'm not going to rehash the whole story, but most of you know what happened. I had a conversation with the new executive producer, and I never have really talked that much about him as a person, mainly because, he wasn't out there as a public figure as part of this, but he's made himself a public figure because now he thinks that he's a radio host too. And so his name is David Rubini. And the first question Dave Rubini asked me when I started my conversation on the phone with him is, so what do you think about this whole COVID thing, huh? Do you think it's real? Is it Bill Gates manufacturing it? And I'm like, all right, first of all, tone down the Alex Jones impression, buddy. But I said, no, of course, it's real. No. And so I kind of just knew right away where things were going. So yeah, full disclosure, I was fired 2 days later when I was supposed to be contemplating if I wanted to take this shit deal that they were offering me. Which, by the way, in retrospect, 20% of zero is still zero, David Rubini. So not to say that, if I stuck around, it would have been a zero network anymore. I probably would have saved it. But anyway, so the idea was that they were starting over. They were taking control of the dark matter network. And I had heard stories about who was involved. I didn't get to talk to the guy, which was something that I had wanted to do, but the guy was a silent partner. Well, this story kind of lays out the whole background of what happened. And in this story, you can read all about who the actual money guy was. His name's Mike Marshallek. He's from New Jersey. From all accounts, it sounds like he's a real tool. A conspiracy radio fan turned anti-face mask crusader is how it's written up in this article. Of late, he faces charges for allegedly holding his 5-year-old son captive during a police standoff over COVID restrictions. Glad I didn't ever have to take a paycheck from that guy. So as you go through this whole story, basically what's happened is Rubini talked Marshallek into putting up the money for Rubini to buy dark matter, because Dave Rubini has these delusions of grandeur in his head that he was, Art Bell's partner in the formation of dark matter, and he was a longtime producer. And from all accounts, from everything that I've ever heard about the guy, from different people that I've talked about, is he's one of these, wannabe hanger-on guys that would email them and say, hey, I can get you this guest. Hey, I can get you that guest. Michelle and I get those emails all the time. And to be honest with you, we delete them because we can try and get those guests ourselves. We don't need a middleman coming in to try to, pat themselves on the back when they do it. And then you have a situation exactly like this, where somebody, starts telling people somewhere down the line that they were the executive producer of a show, or, they were handling the booking, or they were a partner, or whatever other, fairy tale he wants to tell about what happened. So he gets Marshallek to put up the money, $80,000, to buy the network from Keith. And they're going to continue on with Art Bell's legacy. Now, let me tell you a little something about that deal. And again, I apologize to JP for making him hold on, but I know that he hasn't heard this story yet, so he's getting the details too. Let me tell you a little bit of something about that. You weren't buying Art Bell's legacy because Keith Rowland didn't own Art Bell's legacy. Keith Rowland owned whatever the number of episodes was that Art Bell hosted of Midnight in the Desert. And then any other programs that were created under that umbrella. Not the other shows that they were running. They were running Spooky South Coast. They had no piece of that because people were just giving those shows to them. But anything that Keith was producing, original content. So, unfortunately, that means, Amy's news broadcasts and all that were probably wrapped up in that deal. That's what you were buying. You were not buying the rights to Art Bell's name. You were not buying the rights to Art Bell's likeness. You would not and this is, I'm not a lawyer, but this is just my understanding of the situation. You would not be able to take Art Bell's image and plaster it on a t-shirt and sell it for yourself. Those rights are owned by Art's widow. Now, they could license that to you. They had, from my understanding, I don't know for sure, nobody's ever told me, but my understanding is that they had a handshake kind of agreement with Keith, that Keith could obviously keep using Art Bell's name in promotion with the network because that's what mattered. That's why people were still subscribing at that time, because they were trying to get those archives. Well, maybe a little bit for me, but still. So now, things go south. Not surprisingly. You've got Rubini. Think you know my feelings on him. You've got Marshallek. You can kind of decide for yourself. The guy held his 5-year-old son hostage, apparently, over COVID restrictions. My freedoms, you can't take away my freedoms. Yeah, your stupidity is going to take away your freedom, buddy. But anyway, you've got these two personalities rubbing heads, so it's butting heads. So I'm not surprised that it went to hell. And it went to hell very, very, very quickly. If you remember, we're celebrating our couple of months on the air, and they're already done as a network. And they tried to bring it back and failed, and tried to bring it back again and failed. And then Rubini took off and tried to do his own network and failed. So you can just kind of tell what kind of people we're dealing with here. So this con man with delusions of grandeur decides he's going to sue Marshallek. And by the way, you can try and sue me, buddy, but you put yourself out there as a public figure now, so it's all fair game. He puts this lawsuit out. He's looking to get the Art Bell archives, these magic 100 episodes or whatever, that's apparently going to make all the difference. Newsflash, every Art Bell fan that's left alive already subscribed to your network, downloaded all those shows, and saved them. And I know that Art was very much into the paranormal, but I don't think he's coming back through Ouija boards or ghost boxes and creating new episodes. So if the collectors have those episodes, they're done. They're not going to give you $5 a month or $25 or whatever it is that you're going to charge for the shows that they already have. So in this article, he's playing up the fact that now he's doing his self-titled radio show. The last I heard, he did like 3 or 4 episodes. I don't know. But he's trying to get the rights to those Art Bell episodes and everything to do with dark matter. And also $5 million. What world are you living in? And I don't know if this guy's insanity, because I was on some of the message boards that he was on and saw the kinds of things that he was posting. The racist, the anti-Semitic, even though he claims to be Jewish or whatever, but racist postings, anti-Semitic postings. I'll be fair, it might not have been him, but it certainly seemed like him. And on the air, he was also taking credit from the clips that I'd heard. So this person, I don't know if it's a character that you're creating. I don't know if you're trying to be, Alex Jones on meth, or if this is who you really are. But let me just tell you, I wish you all the luck in the world in getting your $5 million. I do. I hope that you get your $5 million. Because the only person who deserves to lose $5 million is Marshallek for even getting involved with you in this crazy thing. And then I can't wait to see if you do get the $5 million and then you try to use the Art Bell name, how quickly Aaron Bell gets that $5 million back from you when she sues your ass. So I wish you all the best luck in the world. Keep pushing that legacy title. I'm going to keep doing this show. And I'm going to keep saying that I'm not the next Art Bell, no matter what people out there seem to think that I think. And we'll just keep doing our thing. And that's probably the last you're going to hear about it with all of this. But it's reached the level of ridiculousness now so much that I have to address it. My only disappointment about this all is that I didn't get the word out to Amy in time to see if she could find Jerry King and to see if we could do a midnight drive on this tonight. because it's just so ridiculous. Okay. Enough of that. I've wasted way too much time of the actual show topic tonight. Let's get into it with one of our favorite guests coming back to the program. J.P. Hague is a practicing lawyer who has experienced unusual and extrasensory phenomena throughout his life that he has sought to rationally research, contextualize, and understand. He is the National Director of MUFON Mauritius and runs Ufology Mauritius and Indian Ocean. Upon moving from London, England to the tropical island of Mauritius, he began to consistently experience and interact with unidentified aerial phenomena of a multidimensional nature. He actively researches, speaks, and writes about the subject and its intrinsic connection to the mysteries through a blended approach and mindset. He considers esotericism, spirituality, and science to be all the right tools and lenses for a better understanding of the layers of reality that surround and interact with us, the worlds within worlds. And he joins us in the program. Good evening, JP. How are you?
Good evening, Tim, and good evening to all your wonderful listeners. It's a genuine pleasure to join you yet again. I think our third meeting. And please don't feel that you needed to have apologized to set out this this kind of litigious matter that you set out. I think it's important to, bring light to these acts of madness that ultimately sabotage the transmission of truth and important subjects that are were once treated with a sort of a brush of taboo that are actually very important to us as a global society. So good for you.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to ask your legal advice on the case, but I will ask your legal advice for my. I didn't go too far and put myself into any legal jeopardy there with what I said, I hope.
No, I think you're just reporting on the facts of on the article. Anything that you said about anyone was just your opinion. You're not, I think in terms of libel and defamation, that's perfectly okay. And also there's a defense of truth. So, I think it's important to openly discuss these things. I mean, we're meant to be living in, living democracies where freedom of speech is allowed. Okay, there's a responsibility that comes with that. We don't just say whatever the hell we want to and denigrate others. But, I think that debate and discussion is very important. I mean, Mauritius is a democracy where I'm based now. But, freedom of speech is under threat as it is in many countries. We're a young country, and things that happen here, we wouldn't necessarily see in my home country of the UK, for example. I'm a dual national. I have Mauritian and British nationality, and I practice the law in both countries. So, I think speaking out is important. I mean, as a lawyer, I've taken a step to actually put this subject on the map here in Mauritius, along with very respectable other members of our group. And it's important because people pay attention. And when they start paying attention, they start to ask themselves questions. When they start to ask themselves questions, then they will start to research and come to their own conclusions. I mean, we're all, each one of us is the arbiter of our own truth. And that's my heartfelt opinion. And I think that if we can't express ourselves, then we're not men, we're not human. This is the beauty of the human condition. We think for ourselves, but we have a nobler side above the animal kingdom in general, where we can philosophize, we can discuss things that are actually core to our human values. And I think we're trying to work out what our human values are in these very strange and almost oppressive times. So, it's important to speak one's truth regardless of the circumstances, and just speak with moderation and be reasonable. And I think that's all that can be asked. So I'm very sorry that this situation is happening. And just before we came onto the air, Tim, I was saying I think that there's a lot of infighting and it's almost to a supernatural level within the sort of esoteric alternative field or industry, if we want to call it that. And I do ask myself whether there are sort of greater forces at play beyond the sort of idiosyncrasies and eccentricities of many great and wonderful and smart characters in in this area. I mean, it does attract a lot of people with mental illness too, and we can't deny that. And it requires a lot of discretion and integrity.
And we've gotten into it with some other UFO guests. Oh, I think, is that Art Bell's ghost coming over the ghost box? Getting a little bit of feedback there. Is that me or you? Okay, I think it's gone away. I was going to say that, we have seen a lot of this stuff blow up in the ufology field over the last year or so. It really seems like there's an accountability happening for people that have gotten away with a lot of stuff. It's a problem in the paranormal world overall, but it's definitely had a light shown on it in the ufology world.
Definitely. And, the problem is that this is a really serious subject because it actually puts our position on the map, not just in terms of, being a self-governing race on planet Earth, but, beyond. And what concerns me is that if we can't actually get on and actually communicate about this in a mature way, then how are we meant to self-realize as individuals and as a species as a whole? And I think the sort of main point I'm trying to make is that this subject, this area, is not really funded. We're only now seeing the likes of the Pentagon wading in, and they just had the ombudsman, or the inspector general, which is like the independent watchdog of the Pentagon, start wading in because they can't ignore this anymore. But in terms of us and the wider community, this is generally unfunded. It's not got the infrastructure and the organization and materials that this subject really needs, because in my view, it needs to come out of the industrial military complex, in the words of Dwight D. Eisenhower, former president of the US and head of the US Army during the Second World War. And it needs to go into the educational sphere. But what we've got is this kind of, not so much fringe anymore, but self-regulating external group of people that relies heavily on intelligent, altruistic entrepreneurs and businessmen that have an interest in this, that have had experiences, that want to promote knowledge and information, like my friend Jordan Peace and Bob Brown, who run conferences at no profit to themselves. But even they have, acts of sabotage and greed, all these kinds of things that, you introduced the show about. So, I do think that we need to rise above this. We need to rise above it, and we need to almost not ignore, but just not get sucked in energetically. Our focus energetically needs to be on the subject matter itself, and this is just a distraction and a sideshow. Well, please. I
was going to say that's part of the issue, is that the field is forever plagued with the question of how much of it is, just people being people and conflicting personalities and agendas, and how much of it isn't somebody throwing a smoke bomb into it and then running away.
Yes. And there's truth mixed with half truth and self-aggrandizement. And this is it. We're literally having, if we're really going to be serious, we have to go through it with a fine tooth comb. And there are, the most destructive force on this planet is ego, the human ego. I mean, we need an ego to navigate this reality. Your name is Tim, my name is JP, and we have a personality, and we have this identity in the material world that we have to fulfill, etc., etc. But that, in my view, is subservient to the greater nature of what it means to be a human being, and the subjects that we're meant to be looking into, that do go into mind, body, spirit, and even soul. And if we're permanently stuck in this materialistic, reductionist, egocentric sphere, we're never going to transcend. I think we will, because I think that we're slowly being ushered towards this self-realization. And I think that through as has happened for millennia, there are cycles of time where consciousness or awareness is far higher than it is, say, today. And it's a never-ending cycle, and I think we're in a downturn. I mean, in the Hindu cosmology of things, we're in the beginning of what's called the Kali Yuga, which is the period of destruction. And under that cosmology, there is Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, who are the gods of creation, maintenance, and destruction. And I think we're in this destructive period in order to reconstruct. And this goes on for hundreds of thousands of years, by the way, Tim, and we're just at the beginning. So there may be a few more court cases to come in all respects in life. So, it is what it is. But I think, like I said at the beginning, we need to act with integrity regardless of wider circumstances. And as we touched on, I think in the second show about a year ago, human consciousness does, I believe, have an impact on physical or material reality. So if we're going to be stuck in this egocentric, materialist way of thinking and behaving, then we're going to create a lot of pain and suffering for ourselves, and it's crazy. I also think that we touched on this earlier, that there are occult forces in a we could call it that in a spiritual and scientific sense, and the ancient Christian Gnostics, who were the mystical Christians of Europe at the time, and they were chased out and purged by the Catholic Church, which did a lot of that, by the way, as we all know. They had a sort of belief system that talked about the demiurge or the demiurgos, which was a Greek word for this governing force, or like a false god of the material world. So not the divine God that some may depict with a beard, but actually almost like a hierarchical sort of governing energy or intelligence beneath the true creator God, that was literally creating this material or dualistic reality for which we are having to answer for our acts and suffer pain and suffer, all this kind of thing. And actually that is in itself a mode of growth for the soul through these difficult challenges and all the rest. And that actually beyond that, there's love, and there's spiritual progress that can occur within other dimensions and realities. So I think it's a number of things. It's the human ego side, because that's the nature of the beast. And when I say that, there is a spiritual side that needs to overcome the animalistic side. And then there's also this kind of governing or subdivision of the creator or creation that is testing the human species in this vehicle of the human body on planet Earth, which is a jewel in our solar system, maybe the cosmos as a whole. And there are all these different forces at play. But ultimately, human consciousness is able to transcend all of them if we actually apply a little bit of discipline and mindfulness to what we're doing, down to the smallest things. How am I brushing my teeth? Am I paying attention to the food that I'm eating in my mouth? I mean, it all sounds like a very Buddhist type flavor, but maybe they had a point. Right. And I'm not a Buddhist.
Well, sorry, we're connecting across the world to the listeners, so some technical issues are going to happen. The part of that is that it's not. I know that it is a bit of a Buddhist belief, but we do see the fact that every action does lead into some sort of other action or reaction to it. So we are having that effect, and certainly, if you want to think that there is intelligent life out there that is interacting with us, whether knowingly or secretly, or however you want to look at it, certainly the way that we treat that experience and the way that we treat the other people that are looking into that experience are going to have an effect. They're maybe the reason why the aliens haven't said, "Hey, we're here" yet, is because the people that are out there talking about them, they look at them and they say, "Oh, we don't want these folks being the ones to herald in our arrival just yet."
Yes, and you're absolutely right about effects beyond here. I mean, it's no coincidence that Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 delta-shaped UFOs in his biplane in that fateful month of June 1947, followed by which a month later, there was the Roswell crash, or two crashes, really. And this is around a time where there were huge amounts of nuclear detonations taking place. And there are cases where the beings somehow communicate to the contactees and saying, this has a ripple effect beyond your reality. When there's a nuclear detonation in this three-dimensional linear time and space, existence that we're in now, there is a ripple effect across the dimensions and reality. So there is this interconnectedness that is coming out of the cases and the timing of significant and well-known ufological events. So that there is that, and without overthinking things, maybe the smallest and most insignificant acts that we perform in our daily life do have effects elsewhere and on the progress of our evolution and soul or spiritual journey, however we want to look at it. So I completely agree with you.
So with that in mind, we came into our last discussion, in the throes of the early stages of this pandemic and seeing kind of the way that was affecting everything that was going on. Here we are. I mean, I guess we can say we're definitely rounding the corner. Of course, things aren't over yet.
Yeah.
But it seems like, where we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, to use an overused phrase. And so with that in mind, we can kind of take a little bit of a look back and see the way that it had an effect on us. How has the last year plus had an effect on the UAP phenomena?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about it, and in Mauritius, we suffered a very strict lockdown situation whereby even going outside to exercise was legally prohibited. Whereas in Europe, you had, in my original country, the UK, for example, you had the right to go and exercise for an hour a day. You could drive to the beach, you could distance from others, you could get outside, which is a basic need. But here, not so much. And yet, both in Mauritius and across the world in the States, the UFO reports were flooding in. And if you think about it, it's a prime opportunity to appeal to the minds of people by these, this intelligence or intelligences showing up. So, I've forgotten what an aircraft looks like. There's no air traffic over Mauritius now. Whereas, twice a day you'd have an extremely large Airbus A380 flying over with a very well-known Middle Eastern airline, and you could hear it. And it's an amazing feat of engineering. But there's nothing in the sky. So it's much easier to see or pick up on these anomalies or phenomena when the world has been shut down. Regardless of the debate as to whether it's scientifically justified and all the rest of it, but the fact is that things are happening. We had a first lockdown here in Mauritius back in March last year, so that was a 2 to 3 month period. And even myself, one evening, this is just an anecdotal personal experience. I was on the phone to my friends Johnny Enoch and Harry Challenger, who is the editor of the Flying Saucer Review, which is the oldest UFO publication in the world. And by the way, Prince Philip, former husband of the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, did not miss one copy of that publication.
Wow.
And his equerry used to pick up that review for him, and his former equerry was the former deputy of the UK Royal Air Force, and he believes he met a human extraterrestrial in a flat in Chelsea, and this is in his memoirs in the book Sounds from Another Room. Anyway, I digress, but I was on the phone to my friends, and then that evening I'm brushing my teeth in the bathroom where we live in the center, close to the mountains. And I kid you not, this enormous disc, which kind of looked like the front of the Starship Enterprise, not quite the same, literally just appeared in the sky in my direct line of vision. But the way that it happened was like switching on a light with a transistor, like the kind of circular switch that you slowly turn up and down, and the light kind of increases in brightness or decreases. It was exactly like that. And it was momentary. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I've seen a lot of phenomena, but this was unreal. It was huge. And it was momentary. It was perhaps maybe 3 seconds. And I'm just sort of looking back and forwards thinking, did I just see this? And it's still there and then it's gone. And this has happened to me before as, different type of sighting. But, there was nothing in the sky. And is it a coincidence that I saw that after speaking to the editor of the Flying Saucer Review? Maybe. And I think we touched on this in the last show about the Jungian type archetypes, where we are individually and collectively projecting our consciousness into the universe or into reality, and it's feeding back with these manifestations. Because I think maybe we need to reevaluate the very nature of reality itself. And so that's a personal experience. But what I'm also noticing is that it's hitting the headline press. I mean, even the last month from the States has been phenomenal. We are living in amazing times. And, we've had the USS Nimitz report from US Navy exercises that took place in 2004, and then later in, I believe, 2007. But we've also now got this USS Russell footage off San Diego in July of 2019, where we're looking at these kind of luminous triangular objects. The Pentagon has confirmed. There's so much coming out. I mean, we had the New Yorker published an amazingly well-written and researched article, and it's extremely long, but worth reading every single word. And it features the former New York Times journalist Leslie Kean in that. And it literally just covers the history of ufology and how the intelligence world and the Pentagon are taking UFOs seriously. And that came out on the 30th of April. It's a fantastic article, and I really recommend it. We've also. Sorry, Tim. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you've followed this for a long time. The question that I would ask is, were we kind of waiting for a global news event like a pandemic that could take all the headlines away and allow this news to trickle out without it being the lead story on every broadcast? That we can insert this into the news at a time when we know people are watching the news, but also they're watching newscasts now with a divisive approach to it. Everybody is either not trusting the news or going only to the news sources that they want to believe or what have you. So it really makes it so that this is the time to sneak that kind of stuff in, where you can have it be out there, but not have to be as accountable for it as you might have been in the past.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, the timing is everything. There's no accident. Everything is planned through God knows how many meetings and strategic thought that goes into it. And you're right, people are reading a lot more. They have more time on their hands. I mean, unlike me, I've got 2 young kids, but which is a lot of work and a beautiful thing. But it's true. You have more free time. You are reading more. You're introspecting far more. And it's a perfect time for people to think about this. And you just can't ignore it when, the Pentagon and other bodies are releasing this information. There's no way around it. You can't deny it. You can't say, oh, it's just a bunch of kooks in a field that are saying that, they've seen this. This is Navy gun footage. This is Navy footage from the US military, where there's no margin of error, where every single round of ammunition is accounted for, and nothing is said without purpose. So it cannot be ignored. But what I think, Tim, what we're finding is that for the likes of you and I, we're aware of this, but most people, I say that meaning the majority, don't really know how to handle it or respond to it, because this is being objectified through the lens of like I said, the industrial military complex. And it has to be justified financially through the concept or notion of threats. This is a threat to national security or an intrusion of our airspace. And that's the problem. It creates a fear of the unknown, whereas it needs to come into the educational sphere that, the likes of myself and ufologists are trying to push this into that direction. Because it's all very well saying, well, we've picked up these amazing objects that are now the Pentagon is saying are transmedium. And what does that mean? Well, it means, they can enter and leave the ocean and pass into airspace and space without any problem at all. So this is a new aspect that is coming out of the Pentagon. Yeah. And please.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, going back to what you were saying, I don't know if you're familiar with South Park at all, but going way back to the beginnings of South Park, I just have a feeling that, the approach that they're taking toward this is like when, Uncle Jimbo was going hunting in the woods, where you just pointed the gun at any animal and said, they're coming right for us, and just shot them. And like, that's what they're trying to do with the aliens, is they're trying to create that mindset of they're coming to get us, they're coming right for us, before we even know why they're here or what they're doing here.
You're right, and it's insidious, and it's been going on for decades. Because if you think about every kind of extraterrestrial-related themed film, the vast majority are threat-orientated. They're about invasive species and, humanity coming together. But the really important ones, the cerebral ones, and actually it's Steven Spielberg in both cases, who I understand through my network has had experiences with extraterrestrials. And his films, I'm thinking Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I'm thinking E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which my kids were just watching the other day. These are very gentle and, very proactive. What's the word? I'm just having a sort of mental blank as the sun is rising over the mountains here in Mocha, which is our morning. It's a very warm and almost loving kind of vibe from these films. It's very gentle.
There's certainly an innocence to it.
Not in the Whitney Strieber sense, but it's positive. But these films, and they're great films. They're well produced. They're well thought out. They're cerebral. But the vast majority are not. So it's already training people to anticipate a threat or fear.
And when you look at the way that they are, shaping the coverage of it, it's not that we're getting, you or I capturing a UFO and having that get serious play on the news. It's the military footage. And I know that it's because the military gives it credibility in a lot of people's minds, but I think it also kind of lays that subconscious seed of this is our defense against them that is seeing these. So the fact that it is the armed forces, I think, is not it's not a coincidence that we're seeing it through the lens of the people that we would call upon to defend us against them.
That's right. And the truth of the matter is that this technology is so advanced, we wouldn't stand a chance unless, Tim, that what we're being shown is not purely otherworldly in the sense that it comes from extraterrestrial visitors, and unless it's actually co-opted technology and that it's actually, intelligence world or special access type program technology that's been developed through or with or in liaison with certain factions or visitors. Maybe the military or whoever this hidden hand within the global power structure is, if this is the case, I don't know, actually to stage the whole thing. Let's film the Tic Tac UFO performing these amazing feats and the gimbal doing a little kind of 360-degree swirl in the air, and then we'll put it out there. Is this genuine multi-dimensional or extraterrestrial activity or vehicles, or is it military or intelligence-led special access program technology? Perhaps a hybrid of the two. And if it is, to what end? Is this a sort of beneficial form of disclosure? Is it genuine? Is it saying, look, they're showing us what they can do, but we're not going to say it's necessarily an imminent threat. It's what we deem to be a threat in our airspace, or is it or is it sort of insinuating that we need to be prepared? is there going to be something staged in order to kind of control the narrative and global structure of how the institutions and commerce and business works, and even religion? That's how important this is. We're an extremely programmable species, and the very fact, as you said, Tim, we were talking about, does it need to come from a mainstream source? This is the point. Are we not able to think for ourselves and actually draw on these the empirical evidence of all these experiences and literature and all the rest of it? Does that count in the mind of or in the minds of an unsuspecting population or uneducated in this sense? Or do we have to go to CNN and Fox News or whatever, BBC, and take it from there, like people are? And that's, I think, the point. And I think that there definitely are genuine direct contacts that are happening at a grassroots level, and I'm one of them. And then again, there is this official or global power structure narrative that needs to happen from their perspective in order to maintain balance and order. There is, I think, a genuine concern that people are not able to handle the truth in the classical terminology of A Few Good Men between Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise. I don't think people are quite ready yet to handle the truth. I think many are, but many will be afraid and looking for guidance. And my other concern is that people will start to actually subjugate themselves and think, well, these beings or visitors are superior to us, so not, let's worship them, but we just take everything at face value and follow what they say. I mean, this is another risk. So there are lots and lots of factors at play. But ultimately, I think that we do live in a chaotic universe which has order to it. And I think that disclosure has to happen somehow. And the very fact that I think it was Dr. Stephen Greer that said you can't get a little bit pregnant. You're either fully pregnant or you're not. If we're going to release something, then it's going to lead to questions that require knowledge of the whole. So, what will be will be. Que sera sera, as we say in French.
Right.
But we don't know.
And the question becomes, too, what do we have, what do we know that is being suppressed right now in terms of things that could just make our own human lives here better? So could we, theoretically have some of the technology that we're seeing? Could they give us renewable energy in a way that it would get rid of fossil fuels, get rid of that oil dependency, and we would run the risk of losing all that money that is pumped into the the global economies as a result of that? So is it more beneficial to keep that stuff hidden? Listen, I go back to this. I heard a long time ago that the military has tires that they put on these big vehicles that will last 50 years. And that we could have 50-year tires on our cars too, but the tire manufacturers would never want to do that because we'll never go buy more tires. And they could make a light bulb that would never burn out, but then we would never go buy another light bulb. So, it's all just a way of kind of controlling the economy by making it a disposable resource.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, planned obsolescence is fundamental to their, the sales structure of products. Things that would ordinarily have worked in the past that are literally designed to fail in your car, your home appliances, everything. And it's extremely dangerous and wasteful. Absolutely agree with you. And if you think it's so banal, it's a tire at the end of the day. We're not talking about anti-gravitic craft. And yet, even to that level, it's not been fully released. And there is a sort of very slow trickle of controlled commercialized leak amongst major corporate interests. So completely agree with you. And this is a really good point, because it leads into the UFO subject, to the extent that absolutely we could be transporting and energizing or fueling, let's say, our global society in a completely new way that would be in harmony with the planet. We wouldn't need to, expend a great deal of money once it's been set up. But But there's also a concern of safety, because we are such a juvenile species. There is this safety and wisdom concern. We have all this technology and knowledge, but do we have the wisdom to kind of handle it? And I think that's a kind of byproduct too. But does that mean we shouldn't be implementing or creating kind of halfway house solutions? I think the answer is no. And in fact, this point comes up in terms of the anti-gravity reality and levitational type technology, which can be done through what are called superconductors or superconducting materials. And I have a dear friend who is a quantum computing genius that's lauded by the University of Montreal, Toronto, apologies. And, what we talk about, and his name is Deep Prasad, is this kind of permitted step of development whereby, okay, they won't allow the world to use full anti-gravity technology. It could just be disastrous. We could be creating weapons or going off planet when we don't know what we're doing. But then this kind of superconductor material halfway house is an option. And by that, we're talking about the use of metals, ceramics, organic metals that conduct electricity without resistance. And in other words, these materials can basically transport electrons with no resistance. So there's no heat, no sound or other energy forms preventing this energy from circulating. And it occurs at what's called, I think it's called a critical temperature. So if you have the temperature decreasing, the conductor material resistance gradually decreases until it reaches this critical temperature. And then at this point, the resistance just drops off. And then you can have this literally, it seems magical, this magical effect. And they do this through a very low energy state. And at the moment, the superconductor materials have to use extremely low temperatures or high pressures to achieve this. So it's not kind of totally viable at this stage, but they're getting there. And there are those that can operate at higher temperatures. I think those are in development, but it's very expensive to do. And the cooling processes for the cooler superconductors is quite inefficient. When we're talking about the sort of UFO tech and this kind of halfway house of superconductors, what we're talking about is not anti-gravity, as I mentioned, but this kind of magnetic field that would allow, through the superconducting state, that would allow this levitational or Meissner effect, I think it's called in the scientific world, to set up these electric currents near the surface. It's at this critical temperature, as I mentioned. It cancels the other fields around it. So that's why we get this magnetic or levitational effect. And that, I think, is going to be something we're going to see in the coming years in terms of public transport, metro, that kind of thing. That will be, I believe, the first thing that we see. And when I say, these superconductors are currently in development that need very low temperatures, we're talking about minus 270 to 260 negative. And then those that I say that are kind of operating in a higher temperature, it's still pretty low. It's like minus 140 and below. So as an example of where we're at now with these superconductors, we have magnets that we know are used for the maglev. So the magnetic trains, for example, there's a bullet train in Japan and then China. MRI, the scanning devices they use in hospitals to look at the kind of human body and all the different sections of it working. Microscopy and powerful little kind of microscopes. And then there's also the kind of transmissible ones that are used in wires and cables. So power transmission. And they do this through ultra-high magnetic fields. So they're not available on a wide commercial scale because of this extensive cooling technology or processes that are needed. And they're really sort of common in a few specialized applications. Like I said, there's the maglev trains, MRI, which means magnetic resonance imaging. And even actually, I missed one. There's electric generators, I believe, that they're built with these kind of superconductive wires, and they have something like 99% efficiency, which is amazing. but I think they need to be built commercially. It's still in a sort of developing stage. But in order to get to this kind of new reality of transportation and even I would say space travel, we can do this through superconductors without having this kind of anti-gravitic technology that we're actually seeing from the visitors, and maybe that the industrial military complex has developed. But we can get to that kind of level, but it needs to be without error. And how do we get to that without this kind of dangerous uncertainty or margin of error? And the result is quantum computing. And this is where my friend Deep Prasad comes in, and he literally is one of a few people doing this in the world right now. And he has access to a very well-known international groups, quantum computers, in order to develop this. But I don't think that it's happening by accident. I don't think that the powers that be would allow this unless it was permitted. But it's, as I said, it's a halfway house. It's not full anti-gravitic technology. But the quantum computers, just to touch on that so that the listeners can understand, these computers are not like the laptop that I'm speaking on now or your kind of PC at home. These are using something called qubits, which is spelled Q-B-I-T or Q-U-B-I-T. And they're using this kind of computation manipulated through microwaves to produce these calculations or results. And the qubit it's basically just a unit of quantum information. And it's, I suppose, the quantum version or equivalent of the classic binary bit. So the ones and zeros we're talking about in the kind of digital standard world. But these quantum computers through the qubits are calculating through two different states of reality. I mean, it's mind-bending. In the classical system that we're using now, a bit would have to be in one state or the other. But with this quantum mechanical qubit computational side of things, it's allowing these qubits to be in a coherent superposition. I think the word is superposition of both states simultaneously. And this is a property that's fundamental to quantum mechanics and quantum computing, as far as I can understand. I'm not as the doctor on board the USS Enterprise says, I'm not a nuclear physicist. I'm a lawyer. So it's doing this through superpositioning, which means that these kind of qubits are spinning up or down into these two different states at the same time. It's doing it through what's called entanglement. We often hear the term entanglement in quantum physics, so interconnectedness between the two states. And then there's also a third means called interference, which means controlling this interference to amplify or decrease the quantum states, depending on what we're trying to actually calculate. How much computing or quantum computing power do we need? And then this is done through algorithms. These quantum computers are using algorithms, and you either search or you're factoring. And this requires a certain level of fault tolerance. And every day, the likes of Deep and others are slowly but surely correcting the qubits. They're error-free corrected qubits. And I think today we're at something like 50. But the problem is that the more qubits or power that we're using with these quantum computers to work out how to produce these superconductor materials and other applications, it means there's this what's called noise, more noise and perturbations. A bit like, when we're using night vision, there's too much power, it can be very distorted. So it has to be done in a very delicate and fine-tuned way. But it is amazing, but in terms of the hidden technologies of the world, it's probably very much a halfway house. So I hope that's kind of elaborated a little bit on this idea of, handling the truth and being able to use it.
Right. It has. And one of the things I think is going to happen because, the military industrial complex, the governments of the world, whoever you want to put the blame on, as they've slept on getting this information and this technology out there, now we're starting to see the people with the money, circumventing them and not waiting around for them to reveal what they know and just figuring this stuff out their own through invention. So you might have, the military might have all these secrets from the Roswell aliens from 1947, but Elon Musk and his team are going to figure out how to do it without that alien help. I'm just looking for, talking about magnetic propulsion and all that kind of stuff. The Hyperloop. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's magnetic levitation, and
exactly.
That's going to get us across the country in 45 minutes.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that Musk and the rest of them, they are being allowed to develop this. There's no accidents. This is in my opinion, planned and done in coordination. And I think that if there were, geniuses that were just producing these things, there are all these kind of standard ways to manage it. They would either try and buy the rights or the patents to that technology. I understand that this is very much the case in the automobile industry. People that have literally created hydrogen engines for very high-speed cars that run off water. And then you have the likes of, Ford or whoever buying the rights so that this stuff never comes out and that they can sell their cars and the economic model is maintained. So there is that. And then I suppose there's, suddenly if you're not complying with the permitted development, let's say, suddenly you have an extremely onerous or unfair tax investigation that bogs you down. Maybe there are legal issues that suddenly come out of the woodwork from nowhere because you breach some law that you haven't actually breached or God knows what. And then in the final analysis, if you're still not going to do as you're told, maybe you're taken out. Maybe you're either discredited and you can't work, or you are put to death. So I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of speculating here, but there are a lot of these accounts that surround the production of technology and free energy devices. Apparently, there's so many that have been produced, but mishaps happen to those that try and bring them out. Because, like we said earlier, there is an extremely powerful a group that need the way that we run or live to kind of be maintained. The status quo allows them to maintain control and huge profits. So we should never underestimate this. At the same time, they will need to allow these kind of incremental steps to happen in order for the planet to survive. We can't carry on like this. There's no doubt. So, it's a fine balance, and I think there are, let's say, the directors of Planet Earth PLC have their ideas, and maybe we see something come out that's a compromise because it's in human nature, assuming they are human, which they probably are, come to some kind of compromise. And some are for the release of technology and others are against. And I've heard this from quite high levels. So, and it is an old power structure. It is the, links to large families, this kind of thing. And apparently they are linked to people that are or beings that are off planet. And there is a sort of middleman management system that's happening here. And we just see it played out in the way things are marketed or press releases on certain technology are coming out. So I think there is a bigger picture. I think that Elon Musk is within this permitted circle of invention and development. And I think it's very much the case as well for my friend Deep Prasad, who is developing superconductor materials through quantum computing. There's no accident. That's my view.
And as we get into the point where, we are making these huge technological leaps, and as we are going back out into space, I think part of that will be a softening of the wow factor of UFOs, that if we're out there and we're getting out to Mars and we're bringing people on shuttles back and forth to a city set up on the moon, and we're doing all of these things that people think are going to be happening in the next 20 to 50 years, then if all of a sudden you have other civilizations coming here from other places, it will seem a little bit more well, of course there's people coming from or beings coming from other planets. We're going to other planets ourselves. It only makes sense. So, it's like when you first invent a boat and you're going across the ocean and you see somebody coming the other way in a boat, you're like, yeah, it makes sense. So, I think that will kind of have some of that feeling about it. And maybe that's just the point we've got to get to before the secrets start to come out.
Yes, I think that's right. Because you have to, it's a step-by-step process. And like we touched on earlier, people generally are not ready. They're not. They're inured into religion and thoughts and systems of belief that separate, ultimately, separate one another from being unified. And when we're talking about venturing into space, we have to be doing it as one planet, as one people, because it's not just about countries anymore. It's about it is intergalactic relations. It has to be said. It sounds funny, but it is. It's and it creates diplomatic implications too. And there are a lot of people in the ufology field that talk about the so-called Galactic Federation. Mm-hmm. But it's actually and I'm not saying if this is true or false or who these beings are, but there's a logic to it, and there's a logic and a reason that we do it here on Earth, how we organize ourselves, and it's not successful. It's not. Nothing is perfect. We're perfectly imperfect, but this kind of modeling needs to start here. Instead of having just a UN for human affairs, this is the point. We need to move out of this industrial military complex fear factor and threat system into education and communication, and let it filter down to people. This is the ideal situation. And this is very much the kind of line that Dr. Stephen Greer takes, who I disagree with on certain things. I mean, I understand the why as to why he says generally that all extraterrestrials are benevolent and that any abduction or negative experiences are military based. I understand why he took that line in a hard contrast to all the things we talked about, the kind of negative programming through the films, fear, the military hold on this subject. But it's not necessarily the truth. And yes, maybe like humans, generally the majority are good. And then there's some who are indifferent or observers. And then there's probably a highly motivated negative minority, like we see in human history, like Hitler and all the rest, that actually have a huge sway if we sit on the fence and do nothing. So that there is the implication of diplomacy and peaceful relations. And I think that all of this needs to happen before we start getting on board craft to travel to places. But Tim, there are so-called former military personnel who I've spoken to who claim that they have been on board one of several secret space programs, and that they operate between the Moon, Mars, and even Ceres, which is one of the outer planetoids or moons of one of the solar system planets, who I forget for this this moment. And the crazy thing is, Tim, is that it's linking to the tiny island of Diego Garcia, which is part of the Mauritian territory here. It's several hundred miles away, but it is Mauritian territory that was excised, which means carved out, by the British colonial powers when they left Mauritius in 1968. And they did that under the influence of the Kennedy and Johnson governments. The US was putting huge pressure on the UK. They were puppeting the UK, probably through, post-Second World War reparations and, generally just doing what they're told. To take this specific group of islands that are called the Chagosian Islands, offshore from Mauritius, to use this base called Diego Garcia, which in conventional informational terms is used as a Navy port for conventional aircraft and strategic operations in the Middle East. And it's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's spelled D-I-E-G-O, Diego, and the second word is Garcia, G-A-R-C-I-A, CIA. And it's extremely sensitive, and I need to be careful how I talk about it, because there is, in my view, and the view of many others, this secret space program extraterrestrial liaison that's happening there, to the point where even in military articles that you can go online and find in magazines talk about personnel being asked to literally clear the airstrip to go inside and await further instructions while a craft or a vessel, or whatever the term is that they used, lands and leaves. But the problem is that there was zero noise. And believe me, the USAF, US Air Force personnel, they could tell you what kind of aircraft has landed just by listening to the engines. Day in and day out, they are exposed. But when there's no noise, there's probably anti-gravity at play, which is silent. And I've spoken to one guy who appears on Gaia TV called Tony Rodriguez, which ironically is the same surname and name of the sister island of Mauritius, Rodrigue, which is where we had a UFO sighting over the airstrip there recently, bizarrely, on the 18th of April, if I remember correctly. And I think that Diego Garcia has a very secretive side to it. We know that NASA and SpaceX are using the telemetry from Diego Garcia to get to the International Space Station. So that they've admitted publicly. It's not just a conventional US strike force base in the middle of nowhere with huge, geographic and strategic importance. So, there is a very hidden side. I wouldn't quite say it's an open secret, because it isn't. It's extremely well protected. But there are people here in Mauritius that are starting to talk about it. I know of one individual who I'm really keen to meet, who's a massive regional investor here. And I found out that he's reached the same conclusion as myself. I even ran the idea, Tim, by two connections of ministers in the government here. And I can tell you, they were not surprised when I spoke about this. And they said, JP, you should write a book about this. I mean, which is a strange reaction of, spouses of government ministers who I understand have no knowledge of this, but they were not surprised. So it kind of just adds fuel to the fire. I think it's one of the most secretive places on Earth for good reason. I think that there are space programs that are operating between the moon and Mars based on what I can find out. I think that these space programs do have a liaison function with other species of being. And I also think that they are able to use consciousness technologies fused with biological technology. And what I mean by that is infusing consciousness into biological bodies with a purpose of deep space travel over extended periods of time. It's literally like this kind of threshold between fiction and science fiction. And to a lot of people, it will sound crazy. But believe me, the people I've spoken to are not crazy. They're super intelligent. They're lucid. They recount the facts in detail. There's no hesitation, which means that they're either telling the truth or they believe they're telling the truth. But the problem is that they're giving very similar accounts independently of one another. And they both implicate the island of Diego Garcia, which they don't have to do. They could be anywhere in the world. So, and perhaps it's not just Diego Garcia. There's probably very many others around the world. I mean, if we also think about it, during Trump's tenure, he announced the Space Force.
Right.
So where are they going to be manufacturing this stuff that's in the public sphere? But even that, people are not really keyed up on. There was even US legislation that allowed for the budgeting of this, and but it's not your mainstream headlines. It's all about COVID and cases. So this is the point. It's about a shift that's required in focus on things that really do matter, that are not simply science fiction, and that actually have a massive bearing on us as a species, more so than diplomatic relations and learning from more advanced and more intelligent beings.
So, but having, I know you said it's a couple of 100 miles, but being that close to where this would be going on, with how frustrating can that be, though, to know that you are that close, but yet you can't get there to actually be able to find out if what you have heard about what's being conducted there is true?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And you know what my answer is that I don't think it's just about Diego Garcia. I think we are in a multiplicity of visitation phenomena. And there's even closer phenomena, intelligences operating off the coast of Mauritius within visible sight. According to the cases, according to research, according to my own experiences, and all the rest. We talked about Diego Garcia. Just to give the listeners an idea, it's on this really thick ridge of crust of the Earth, and that's called the Chagos Archipelago. It's about 17 square miles, so it's not nothing, but it's small. It's a key U.S. military base in the region. It's a launch pad for Air Force missions, like I said, in the Middle East. There's a deep natural harbor for Navy operations. And I think there's about 5,000 service members there at any one time. And it has a bowling alley and a burger bar and shops. But this is all the kind of surface area type use of the base. I think like anything, there are different layers of truth and operational use within this base. And it's so important that it was literally carved out by the British government, and thousands of islanders were evicted at the time of independence back in 1968. And even this has gone before the UN, to the point where I think 2015, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague in the Netherlands, same surname as me, ruled on it. They said that the UK did not give due regard to Mauritius's rights over Diego Garcia, and that the UK had breached its obligations. In 2017, the UN General Assemblies, I think there were about 94 or 95 countries that voted in support of Mauritius's dominion over the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia. And they even went to the International Court of Justice. And that ruling took place in 2019. And the International Court of Justice said that the UK should hand over the administration of Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands to Mauritius to legally complete the decolonization. But because this matter, let's say, was referred to the Court of International Justice by the UN General Assembly, technically it's not binding on the UK. So it's kind of got advisory weight. So, if we look at this huge international embarrassment that's happening on a vast scale before the UN, what is so important about this tiny little island or group of islands that the UK and really the US that's behind this would face mass international embarrassment and potentially sanctions? So it's very, very curious. And I think that even India has an island that Mauritius has granted them called Agalega. But I don't have any information about this Indian island. I don't know whether there are kind of secret space technologies happening there, or whether it's geopolitically conventional type activities that are happening. But Diego Garcia, definitely, in my opinion, definitely has this secret space program facet to it. I actually want to try and meet the former prime minister, who agreed to meet me, but never happened because of COVID last year, because he was basically the son of the first independent Mauritian prime minister. And they were obviously very pro-UK-US. So I thought, well, anyone in the political sphere that may have an inkling of knowledge about the use of Diego Garcia, it's probably him. But it's not happened, and I don't really know. But in terms of what you mentioned about, it's kind of hundreds of miles away. There's all this stuff going on. There are cases that are happening just off the west coast with invisible sight, coming in and out of the water. And I think I covered one of them on perhaps the first show we did. And it's absolutely amazing. I even spoke to the son of a senior police officer in a town on the west coast who said that they were aware, or the police were aware, of abduction cases, but they weren't allowed to report it as such. They were just simply put down to being missing persons cases. And there's one case where I believe it was in the late 70s, where a guy was working in the sugarcane fields here, because sugarcane is one of the biggest exports of Mauritius, always has been. It was a sort of colonial crop that was brought here by the Dutch and then maintained by the French and then the British. And he was working in the field. He disappeared for 3 days and then turned up again in exactly the same spot from which he was taken. And this is the story he gave, apparently. I have friends or people that have become friends whose cases I've investigated, and they've been craft over their homes, landing. They've seen beings inside the craft. And, it was a whole family that witnessed this, like I have with my own family here, my children. So there is a lot going on in the immediate vicinity. I think that it is, yes, partly multidimensional. I think it is, yes, various different species or observers that are here. And then there's this sort of industrial military liaison side going on at Diego Garcia, which makes me think that, no one really has ownership over this. Honestly, I think from the powers that be on Earth, no one can control this. All that they do control is the perception of reality through the media and all the rest of it. That's where the power lies. But in terms of having any kind of dominion over the coming and going and, appearances, I don't think they have any say in the matter at all, because they're outclassed technologically and, all the rest.
I think, we're going to take a break here coming up, just because I blew the other two breaks because the conversation was so fascinating, but I want to give you a chance to, take a few moments off.
I'll send you a check in the post.
But, I do want to, when we come back, I want to get into something that I know you have looked at and we've discussed a little bit before in the past, and that's, what this all means kind of beyond just the physical nuts and bolts, visitations. What is the spiritual side of this, and what does all that mean? So we'll get into that. So we will go into a break. Just a reminder too, while we are taking this break, I want to let you know about two things. One, there will be no Spooky South Coast tomorrow night. We are still holding on to our break for a couple more weeks, just so you're aware about that. Two, we will have a new episode of The Dark Fog, hosted by The Dark Voice on Sunday, presenting some of the best in old-time radio to you. And one more thing, I will just hype up that next Friday night, a week from tonight, we will be joined by Aaron Cadieux, who is the co-director of the Bridgewater Triangle documentary, and he is also working on a new docu-series about the New Bedford Highway murders. He's going to be joining me to talk about all of the true crime that has happened here in southeastern Massachusetts. And it's mind-blowing just how much there actually has been, and the gruesome nature of some of these cases. But we're also going to be talking about this new upcoming docuseries on Epix called Fall River. And it's all about the Fall River cult crimes of the late 70s, early 1980s. So by that point, I will have already been able to have published my review. Any reviews are embargoed until Monday by the network. But I did get an advanced screener of the series. I'm going to watch it tomorrow. And then I will write up my review and publish it on Monday on ultimateunexplained.com. And I'll make sure I share it in the Midnight Society Facebook group. And then we can talk about that case along with a whole bunch of others next Friday night. So you know what to do. Follow us on social media at MidnightDOTFM, and you'll know who all of our guests will be next week when we release the lineup on Sunday. All right, back with our final segment of Midnight Society coming up in just a few moments on Midnight FM.
listening to Midnight Society with Tim Weisberg on Midnight FM.
And welcome back. Our final segment of tonight's edition of Midnight Society here on Midnight FM. We're talking with JP Hague, and we're talking about let's get into the real exotic side of UAP. Now, we've been talking, first of all, I'm very proud of myself, JP, because your third appearance now, my third discussion with you, I finally learned how to pronounce Mauritius correctly. Are you still there with us? Did I hang up on you? Did I mute you? No?
Sorry, Tim, it's my fault. I put it on mute during the break.
Oh, no problem.
I was just talking to myself momentarily there. It can happen. But I just wanted to say, no, you did great. You pronounced my name perfectly. I have complete faith and confidence in you. You are more East Coast. You have much more European sway. So, no, absolutely good.
So, but we have talked a little bit in the past about the idea of there being a spiritual system behind these things, and let's get a little bit more into that.
Sure. So UAP, ET, extra dimensionals, you and me. Is it a universal purpose? I say yes, and it goes quite deep. I think that if I'm going to cover this, I think that I need to sort of give these highlight points as to what it means and where it goes. And I think the first point I would like to make, Tim, is that this UFO UAP phenomena is progressively evolving our culture as a human, society, our belief systems, and actually our DNA, directly and indirectly. So, whether or not they're real doesn't actually matter. If people believe it is real, it is real. It is real. The evidence tells us that it is very real. There's appearances, interactions, contacts, even abductions, and they're becoming a much more conscious part of the human story here on Earth. Human limitations, as we know, are cultural and ideological, and all human history is passed down through our DNA. So that's the human story. People say, well, the history of the universe and the planet is in what's called the Akasha, or Akasha, which is an ancient Sanskrit word for spirit within space. So, in other words, we're slowly marching towards a collective awareness, I think, an acceptance, and ultimately a response or self-determination, regardless of our tendencies to suppress information. And we really covered this very thoroughly today, this evening. So be it by the intelligence of the beings, the human intelligence community, and or the elite, and even our own self-conditioning, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, we're going to be heading through and into the truth. That's where I see things going. The second point is that the phenomena is definitely manipulating and teaching us to transcend these false limitations within the mind and even the erosion of ego. And that's funny, we're ending the show as we started. We were talking about the human ego, court cases over nothing, and all the rest of it. This is what it's about too, in my opinion. So, at the current stage, we're in this kind of controlled disclosure environment with all the press releases we're seeing. And at the moment, we're still in this kind of self-preservation or perception of military threats. And eventually, I think that this is going to go into the educational sphere and the wider community, even though there will always, in my opinion, be attempts to control the narrative. So I would go as far to say that even forced abductions, which is a difficult thing to say because I know that it's not easy, may eventually be viewed differently. So, we could move through this kind of shock and trauma and into the transmutation and spiritual side of things, which is actually an idea that John Mack, the wonderful Harvard psychologist, came up with. The third point is that I think there's a superintelligence, and it's communicating with us symbolically and psychically. And this is really in so many cases, and even my own experiences. And it reveals this kind of penetration of the subconscious mind, which is the vast majority of who we are as people, and the conscious mind to a lesser extent. All these things around the human psyche, through the use of patterns and symbols in the UFOs that are appearing and the beings. And we should never underestimate the power of symbols to change civilizations for the better or the worse. I mean, think of the swastika. So symbols are gifts to self-initiation as individuals and self-discovery. And they do plant seeds into this collective consciousness, which is an idea of Jung that we covered, I think, on the last show, Tim. So these are the first 3 points. The next one, I would say, is that, the phenomena is definitely codependent, and it's co-created, and it's co-manifested. It's a spiritual hierarchical order, and almost appears like a spiritual type duty that is being conducted and that we are part of. So it goes beyond extraterrestrials in the physical sense, and it does go extra-dimensional and multidimensional. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, I think there's this kind of directing or governing entities or builders, inhabitants, whatever we want to call them, or messengers even, and each of them has a role to play in this theater of existence, and that these roles are being played out either knowingly or unknowingly, a bit like us. We're no different. Another point, I think that, it doesn't exclude us as human beings from other timelines. I think that the human genome doesn't simply exist across and within our dimension, on our planet, on other planets or universe. And it could be that factions of humanity are communicating with us as other aspects of one, group across the dimensions, which is a strange one, because we think of these kind of bizarre creatures and cases that have happened that show very, very odd things, like the Mothman cases, for example. But it's also probably about humans in other dimensions too. That's something that I've picked up on. And then a kind of final 6th point on, what is it, and in terms of the universal purpose. I think that infinite dimensions, if we're in this multidimensional, extra-dimensional hypothesis, infinite dimensions aren't or are not necessary in order to vehicle this phenomena and the whole soul purpose or soul shepherding purpose that I think is happening on our level as human beings. And perhaps we're actually looking at the manifestation, the kind of end result of divine laws. And what I mean by divine laws is this kind of intrinsic or inherent firewalling. So firewalling order and a limitation that the intelligence operate within, in their number, in their interactions with us as humanity. And that maybe we've even been atrophied or limited in our childhood to kind of block out the ability and senses to tap into seeing these beings or the phenomena as a whole. And that maybe some of us are more susceptible to receiving it than others. So socialization, social conditioning, these are the enemies of consciousness and conscience. And what I mean by consciousness is awareness. And what I mean by conscience is the ability to discern. And I think that, it goes into the esoteric traditions, it goes into psychology. Conscience, knowing how to handle something or having to respond to any given situation, and in this particular context, how to deal with interactions and disclosure. Conscience gets into the conscious mind thought as to how do I deal with this. But I think conscience also goes into the science of the soul, and that conscience is a reflection of soul and higher order and divinity. And I remember I actually exchanged on this with Anthony Peake, who's a wonderful guest that you've had on, who also has this perspective too on conscience. So on all these points that I've just mentioned, to summarize, I think that the why is this happening, this interaction, this phenomena, is essentially spiritual. So it's probably best answered from the intelligence of the heart over the intellectual mind. And let's face it, everything is in the mind, in the material world, in the military-industrial complex, in the press. This is where we're being shown to look. But actually, I think the answers are best answered looking inside towards the heart. So that's one aspect of why it's happening. Another point to why is probably to remind us that we're neither separate from, and we're not inferior or superior, for that matter, to anything or anyone in our true divine essence. So, we shouldn't look down on it. We shouldn't be thinking that we're lesser beings than the visitors or whatever this intelligence is. And I think that evolution is relative, and that all beings across the spectrum have their place and have had their evolutionary process happen to them, just as we have or are as humans with souls, or atma, as they say from the mystical Indian tradition. So in truth, what we've covered is that humans and all beings and intelligences exist and are at the service of growing one divine and governing presence and each other. So we're looking at oneness. We're all one. And I think that this entanglement is both amoral and moral from a human perspective. It goes beyond human notions. That's the point. So from a higher order or perspective, there could be this void of human notions like good or bad or ugly, like the film with Clint Eastwood. So it's simply put, it's simply progress and learning to love and learning to look within and seeing everything as in connection, and nothing is excluded or exclusive. And I think that the duality of our planet and this existence that we're in exists to synthesize our knowledge as to who or what we are. They say, in the esoteric traditions, that God creates in the ternary in three. There's the thesis, the antithesis, and then the synthesis. And it could be that our subjective or personal bubbles of experience and existence may be designed and allow this source or intelligence of creation to enjoy self-knowledge and growth of the whole. But we don't know that we're part of this. So, I mean, a religious person might say, well, God is within you. Maybe it is, whatever it is. And, there are cases that talk about, even, I mentioned earlier about the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, and his equerry, his assistant, who gave him every single copy of the Flying Saucer Review. Well, this former head of the UK Air Force had a meeting in a flat in London, in Chelsea, with a man who went by the name of Janus, and this is written in his memoirs. This isn't, speculation. And the guy, this being, human-looking being, a humanoid, said to him that what you call as God is a divine spark that exists in all DNA of all living beings. So, according to that theosophy, it's within all living matter. But I suppose that as human beings with greater faculties, there's probably more of it, whatever this is, coming through us, because we can express more. And I think it really, Tim, it leaves more questions than answers. If the creators, this creator or divinity has created all these different worlds or dimensions, realities, are these subordinate beings, forces, intelligences, whatever we call it, that inhabit or direct these worlds, such as ours and us, are they simply the product of a divine thought? How is it that there is this hierarchy and this kind of drama playing out? Do certain of them create and support these existences? Do others act as messengers between worlds? I think the traditions say yes, they do. Who or what watches over and communes with this world in particular, which is our experience here and right now? Who or what watches over and communes with those who observe us? Who watches the watcher or the watchman? Are the dimensions of an immediate or an intermediate nature in terms of the creation of the universe? Is not the visible the proportional measure of the invisible, which goes into traditions like Kabbalah? If the observable universe is structured and supported by divine forces of manifestation, what can be said of the composition of the human soul? And why, if we have a soul, is man shepherded by a soul? Why do we need a soul? So if there is this kind of one omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipotent, all-present supreme intelligence, isn't it time to reflect this beauty in the human project on Earth, here and now, instead of all the nonsense of ego and control and conflict that we're experiencing? So, we've gone from a very observational, objective viewpoint to something that's extremely personal, introspective, and if not more important than what can be observed. And we need to go beyond observational ufology and into the spiritual. That's my conclusion.
Well,
so
I was going to say more important, yes, but also the far harder way of looking at it. I mean, to get people to be introspective about anything is very difficult. Imagine trying to get all of mankind to be introspective about something at such a high level.
Exactly. But the truth, if we're going on this premise of a divinity within, the truth is that potential is within every single human being, from the most loathsome of murderers on death row to the Dalai Lama. And maybe that gives us hope. I don't know. But that potential exists. And when I think of this, the 100th monkey syndrome, for example, where there was an observational experiment done on monkeys that learned to sort of behave in a certain way on a Japanese remote island. And then within days, monkeys elsewhere on the planet were doing the same thing without any kind of instruction or guidance. Maybe it's unnecessary for these people to actually consciously go on that path. Maybe if this Jungian collective unconscious is real, the very fact that you and I are having this conversation right now, and there are people going out, looking and observing UFOs, maybe that's enough to change consciousness by itself.
But it has to happen, though. I'm sure there's been plenty of people that have been able to change that consciousness within themselves over all the millennia of human beings. There's probably been plenty of people that have achieved that level of self-awareness and self-actualization. But,
yes.
It's almost like the herd immunity of spiritualism. Like, you have to get a good portion of people to be on board with that for it to really have a direct effect on more than just the individual.
Yeah, maybe. That's it. That's a good question. What if we're going to look at it as a percentage? What percentage suffices? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? That we don't know. But I think that you're right. It's an exponential trajectory, and the more, even though it's in this industrial military threat-based context at the moment. Like, that in itself is going to start asking people, people will start asking themselves questions and researching and listening to, your show, or going to a conference, or, organizing a skywatch. Like, these are spiritual acts, but they're not seen as such. That's how I see it. So, without getting all kind of hippie about it, it's not. It's a very practical point. And this is the conversation I had with my quantum physicist friend Deep Prasad the other night, who I believe, when I listen to my friend speak, he speaks in a different language. He's literally communicating in a new way. And I think that we need to conjugate the worlds of science and spirituality to have a common type language that reflects both. Because I think at the moment they're treated as mutually exclusive when actually they're not. They're intimately tied together. And I think that when we start learning this new language, things won't seem as strange as they might do now, and viewpoints may not be so far apart as they have been. I think the gap is closing, but there's still a long way to go. Because when we look in the quantum field, in the world of quantum physics, anything goes. There has to be a kind of theory, or some talk about the unified theory, and you have physicists that are referring to Vedanta, the ancient scriptures on existence of mysticism of India, and how it actually it's pretty accurate in terms of how things work. And celestial movements, things that they technically shouldn't have known about back then if we're going by, this kind of upward curve of growth and development in societies, that actually was there. How did they do that? Where did that information or knowledge come from? So I think it's a cyclical thing, and we're in a time where we're being offered the opportunity to open our eyes and investigate and understand, and we're sort of slowly waking up. We're coming out of a deep sleep, and I'm grateful to the conventional press for actually giving some serious coverage to this, because it cannot be ignored any longer. And then from that, I'm hoping that there will be, more funds and structure that's put to this for the benefit of everybody. And even if it is co-opted, even if there is at this stage going to be a controlled narrative, you can fool all the people all the time. You can fool. Sorry, you can fool. What was it? It was a quote from Abraham Lincoln and Bob Marley paraphrased. You can fool all the people some of the time. You can fool some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. So there will be a debate, even if the narrative is led in a certain direction. I think ultimately it cannot be stopped. It cannot be totally controlled. And the beings themselves, no one actually has any control over, what they do and who they contact. So I think we can have some degree of faith in the kind of overall direction. It's just a question of time. How much time will this take?
Well, and you had said before too that is there a percentage we can put on this that will make a difference? Do you feel that having a full reveal of everything, however you want to look at that, but if we had the full actualization and realization that these beings are out there and they did the proverbial landing on the White House lawn, would that make a difference? Would that jumpstart that transition, or would it just cause more problems for it to happen that way?
I think, actually, Tim, if I'm really honest, the answer is it doesn't matter, because there would be people, if an extraterrestrial landed on their home and shook their hand, they still wouldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. Even if this is the point, we're so conditioned. But there will be others that say, this is interesting, this is not normal, it's not normal to report this for fun, it's not April Fool's Day, that will trigger that. So it doesn't matter, it's a good thing, because, like I say, we don't know what the critical mass, let's say, of people persuaded by the evidence. And I hate the term believer, or are you a believer in UFOs? No, I'm not. I'm persuaded by the evidence, which is factual, objective, and occurring in consensus reality. We need to totally transform the way we are speaking about this, because it's a very real and important subject. And I think that, the sort of staging things on the White House lawn, people have talked about it. It would be a good thing, because it just there's no such thing as bad publicity, as they say. I just think that it will accelerate the need for education. They can't just leave it in the hands of the military. Because it's not, the military aren't there to consult and support social evolution. It needs to go into the educational sphere. There needs to be international and intergovernmental cooperation and coordination. It's a huge amount of time, energy, and resources that's required. This is where it needs to go. And I think that is where it will go. It's, like I said, it's just a question of time. There's no stopping this now. We are living in unbelievable times. We've never got to this point before in living memory. I mean, there's so many accounts from medieval periods and crop circles, all the rest of it. But we didn't have the handle on information and global empirical information and processing of information at that time. It's always been around. It's nothing new. It didn't start with Roswell or before that. It's been going on since the dawn of time itself, in my opinion. And there's a reason that human beings exponentially exploded in the last 50 to 60,000 years in terms of culture, agriculture, art, science, mathematics, astronomy. It goes on and on. After millions of years of the same old stuff being found in spearheads and all the rest of it, and then suddenly there's this change. How is it normal that evolution takes place and takes hold so rapidly? I mean, I can't answer that, but it's curious. And so what happened? What changed within the human genome, and how to create that change? Maybe we're designed to be receptive to this more now, for the future of the planet and, our future generations. I mean, my own children, I'm very careful about how I approach this with them because they're interested. But, they've seen the phenomena with me. And it's to them, it's not scary. For me, when it first started happening, my adrenaline levels were pumping. I was excited. I was scared. I mean, it's mad. But with these kids today, they are so relaxed about it. It's not true. It's not a big deal. And we just call them, they say, oh, it's the friends in the sky. And I said, yeah, that's a nice term. But I'm very careful not to put any kind of spin on it, religious, spiritual or otherwise, because they'll come into their own realization in good time. But we can't deny the fact that, we're playing in the garden in the afternoon and these lights are just passing over the garden at low altitude. Or there's a power cut in the house and in the complex. And then, these lights are just dancing in the sky and they're pink. And my little girl's going, this is beautiful, Daddy. What is this? We just observe. We have to come out of the, when we have these experiences, we have to train ourselves to come out of the rational mind, stop thinking, literally to stop the mind from analyzing, just to be a bit quiet and just to kind of engage in the experience. And then afterwards, try and catch up with it. That's what I've tried to do. And, there's hundreds of pages of material that I've written just to kind of record it and try and understand it. But there is this deeply spiritual and irrational side to the phenomena that is ever present in, the literature, the empirical evidence, the cases. And even the great Dr. Jacques Vallée and John Mack have gone into this. And I think that they're very on point. And the other author who I really deeply admire who passed away is, his name is right on the cusp of the end of the show. It's coming. It will come to me in a sec. I've read all of his books, and I just thought this guy is writing exactly what I'm experiencing, and he's analyzing it in a way that I can identify with, and the way that he's observing the kind of movements through the spectrum of color, the spectrum of light, in terms of how they're appearing, manifesting, and then disappearing or dematerializing. And he got it spot on. And this author is from the 60s and the 70s. And I'm just trying to scan my mind as to who he is, and it will come to me. And it's John Keel. John A. Keel.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, I know you know about it. I think he was from your region of the States as well, possibly.
Yep. Just a little bit southwest of me.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a legendary journalist, and I just identified with him because he would write his his analysis in the books, and it was so analytical and intelligent and funny. And then at the back of the books, he's writing about all these weird personal subjective experiences that have happened to him. But he's able to separate the two, which I do too, and it's very important. You should never be sort of, there's so many, and this is all well and good and important and needs to be there. There's all these personalized subjective experiences. Oh, I'm a contactee. This is what this race is telling me. Fine. We need the information, and no one should be judged or dismissed unless, there's good cause to. But there needs to be the separation of personalized belief. Like I said, belief kind of implies an absence of knowledge or a very skewed view or jaundiced eye on a subject, and a kind of a wider and more encompassing view of things. Be a bit more circumspective about it. Could be this, could be that. Okay, this experience maybe confirms this point, and I mean that's how I see it. But I think there are scientists that beautifully balance, or researchers that balance the intellectual, analytical mind with the intuitive. And I think that even science, I believe, recently published on the fact that intuition is the greatest form of intelligence, which isn't how we're taught at school.
Well, I think that's probably a good spot to leave it then.
All right.
Just one quick question though before we go, and maybe maybe it's not a quick answer, but feel free to take your time answering it. What can we do to try to move this forward? And I don't mean in terms of like signing petitions and asking the government and protesting the release of information. I just mean us each on a daily basis. What can we do to kind of get ourselves ready for the eventuality of finding out what's to come with this phenomenon?
It's so simple, in my opinion. It's as simple as just talking about it, being approachable about the subject. I mean, I'll give you an example. With my own parents, who are back in the UK, I understood at the time when I kind of broached the subject with them, and they still don't really know how to respond at times. So you have to, I'm a lawyer. You have to adapt to your audience. You have to ask yourself, who am I speaking to? And we're all people. We just have to adapt how we actually approach the subject with people, not just jump in and assume that they know the same things as us or whatever. You have to adapt, and you can put your toe in the water with them. But the main thing is just try and talk about it. Try to share. Try and raise points of interest. Point them to an article. They like reading the newspapers? Check out this article in the New Yorker or the New York Times. Really? Does that happen? Is it true, or is it just sci-fi? This is. It needs to be gently approached. We need to immerse people gently into the bath of knowledge and actually get them to understand and wash themselves in this knowledge. So it's just about adapting, having conversations, first of all, and adapting your conversation or points to the audience or the person in front of you. I mean, as I started to awaken to this reality, I remember, at the time my parents had an electrician or a plumber at their house, and he was talking about UFOs with them. He said, and he was just venting. He likes to talk to people. He works with the public. He's telling them, and my mother was like, it's interesting what he was saying, but, people would think he's possibly mad. And she said to me, John, you're a lawyer and you're respectable, you work in a high-powered industry, and you need to be very careful about what you say and who you say it to. And she was right. But at the same time, I knew that it was true. And, they grew concerned. And, the way that I dealt with that was when I was visiting home on a business trip from Mauritius. My mum was in the kitchen, and I could just see she was concerned. She didn't think I was crazy, but she said, "You're probably ahead of your time in the way you're thinking." I said, "You know what, Mum? Come with me into the garden right now. Let's see if there's an experience that you can actually see with your own eyes." A bit like doubting Thomas in the story of, Jesus appearing and showing the hands with the nails. She goes into the garden with me. I put my arm around her, and I said, "Just relax and just look at the sky." And all I did was just thought to myself, if there is a time and a place for you to manifest, whoever you are, whatever you are, now is the time. And you know what? There was an object that showed up, this bright spherical light that just pulsed, and she couldn't believe it. And she said, "You're telling the truth." And I said, "Of course I am. And because I haven't shown you, it doesn't mean it's not true and that it's not happening to millions of other people in the world." And that changed things. And it was similar with my wife. After we got married, she said to me, "You're not the man that I married." And I said, "We're always changing. It's just whether we change together." But then, while she was pregnant with our second child, we had experiences together, and an object was responding to my commands at exactly the right and critical moment that it needed to happen to support that kind of relationship, and actually show her that this is real, it's intelligent, it's guided, and it's intentional. So I think that if you have the bravery or the courage to step into that space and start having conversations with people, you will find that there are things possibly that happen in your life that support this, because there needs to be there needs to be. I believe, my perception is rather, that there is a guided unfolding that is happening, and it's from all angles. It's from the beings, it's from the military, it's happening. And I think that all we need to do is just think about who we're speaking to, who is in front of me, how do I adapt the conversation? If there's a point that I can make about this, then I will. Because that in itself is changing consciousness. And if it will act on their subconscious, even if they just go, oh, that's interesting, and then, we move on to another subject. It's like planting seeds. And I think the seeds are spreading, and they're spreading fast. So that's my take on it, Tim. What do you think?
Oh, I would agree. And I think the more we have conversations like this, like you were saying, talking about it makes a difference. The more that we can have conversations that look at the bigger picture, and we can get beyond the, what is it, what's happening, how can we prove it? And we start to ask the questions and have the discussion points of, okay, let's just say that it is happening. Now, what does it mean, and where do we take it from there? That's what's going to get us moving forward.
Yeah, we're no longer in the sphere of, do they exist? They do exist, but what are they? Who are they? Why are they here? What's the meaning of this? And that's entirely my focus. It's undeniable, objectively undeniable. So let's move on.
Well, and I promise you we will try and do that. We'll do our best on this end. You keep doing what you're doing, and we'll try and catch up.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It's always a genuine and heartfelt pleasure to come onto your show, because the discussion is cerebral, and you're doing a great job. Fantastic guests. Midnight FM is a winner, regardless of all circumstances and circumstantial problems that may come up every now and then.
Well, thank you for that. Michelle gets all the credit for that. I just show up.
Well done, Michelle.
I show up and turn the microphone on. She's the one that makes it. So, and then Amy on the other side making all the technical stuff work. I get to take all the glory from their hard work.
But you don't. You're very kind, and you share that. And well done, Amy, too.
Well, thank you so much. You take care, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, Tim. All the best.
You too. And everybody out there, thank you all for tuning in for another week of the program. I didn't even mention to you what happened last night, but we did have the stream was down. We did have an issue where we couldn't connect with the stream, and I had a talk with Amy. We're going to put a couple of things in place so that going forward, I can try and fix it on my end. I am not the technical person. There's a good chance. I mean, I'm pretty technical, but not when it comes to, running this network. There's a good chance that I could totally crash everything if I do try to fix it. But she seems to think I might be able to handle it if she trains me up on how to do it. So hopefully we won't have any more of those issues. But we'll be back next week with another full week of programs for you. And you'll only have to wait until Sunday to find out who the guests are going to be. Just follow us at Midnight DOT FM on Twitter and Midnight DOT FM on Facebook. Give us a like over there, and you'll find out as soon as we put it out on Sunday. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there that are listening to the program, or, happy Mother's Day to the moms of the people that are listening. And I hope that you have a great day on Sunday. I'm going to go over and hang out with my mom. My dad has a couple of things that he wants me to fix while I'm over there. So we'll do that. But I'll make sure that I get that stuff done early for you so that you'll be able to know who the guests are going to be. And you won't have to, keep checking while you're spending time with mom. All right, so that will do it for this week. Thank you again for joining us, and we will talk to you next week. Until then, have a great weekend and a great night, and as always, enjoy every sandwich.